My name is Rachel Carter. I am 34, and for years I told myself I could handle my family's sharp words, the comparisons, even the cold silences. But that Christmas night in my parents' house, when 20 guests gathered under glowing lights and polished silver, the mask of our perfect family slipped. One moment my father was raising a glass to tradition, and the next his anger struck me harder than I ever imagined. My mother's laugh followed, my sister clapped, and the room turned against me. What happens when the people you trust most decide to humiliate you in public? Stay with me, because the choices I made after that night will leave you stunned. Let me take you back to where it began. The Christmas lights glowed softly against the frosted windows of my parents' old house in Concord, Massachusetts, and for a moment I let myself believe it might be a peaceful night. The big oak table was dressed in red and gold, candles flickered, and a pine wreath hung proudly over the fireplace. 20 guests gathered, neighbors and relatives, sipping wine, laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. On the surface, it looked like a picture-perfect Christmas party, but under it all was a tension I could feel in my bones. My father, William Carter, stood at the head of the table, his silver hair slicked back, his suit sharp as ever. He raised his glass and everyone went quiet. He had always loved commanding a room, and even at 62, his voice carried authority. He talked about family, about legacy, about how proud he was of the traditions the Carters had built. My mother, Linda, smiled up at him, her diamond earrings catching the light, her hand resting gently on his arm, as if to show the crowd they were unshakable. I sat a few seats away, watching, my glass untouched. I wanted to believe this night could be a turning point, maybe even a reconciliation. It had been years of strained visits and careful distance, and yet I came because the invitation had been written in my father's hand, because a part of me still wanted to believe I mattered. Then he shifted the subject, his words heavier. He spoke of the house we were standing in, the old Carter home, built in the late 1802, the heart of our family history. He said it was time to think about the future, to put the house where it belonged. He turned toward Emily, my younger sister, who sat glowing in a new green dress, her hand looped through Jason's arm. Guests nodded approvingly, as if they knew what he was about to say. My chest tightened. I heard the blood rush in my ears. Before I could stop myself, I spoke. My voice cut through the hum of approval, calm but firm. That house is not yours to give away. It was placed in a trust by Grandma Eleanor. You know that as well as I do. The room shifted. Conversations froze. My father's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing in a way that made me feel like a child again. He set his glass down slowly and turned to me. His jaw clenched. Rachel, you will not ruin this evening. I kept my eyes on him. I will not sit here while you pretend the law does not exist. Grandma made her wishes clear. That house belongs to both her grandchildren, not just to Emily. My mother let out a short laugh, sharp and cutting. The sound sliced through the silence. Her face was still smiling for the guests, but her words were cruel. Why should you care, Rachel? You have no children to pass it to. Give the house to Emily. She has a future. You do not. My breath caught. The words hit like a blade. I saw a few guests shift uncomfortably, one older man lowering his eyes to his plate. Emily leaned forward, her voice ringing with glee. Exactly, Mom. Rachel does not need it. She is nothing but a burden. Worthless. She clapped her hands together and a few people actually gasped. Jason tried to pull her hand down, but she shook him off. I felt my face flush hot, my hands trembling under the table. I tried to speak, but before I could form the words, my father moved. His arm swung with a speed I never expected. The sharp crack of his hand across my cheek echoed through the room. Everything went still. My head snapped to the side, my skin burning. The guests froze, eyes wide, some with mouths open, others staring into their drinks, as if pretending they had seen nothing. My mother let out another laugh, softer now, almost triumphant. She sipped her wine. Emily clapped again, this time louder, her voice high and mocking. Finally, Dad, you put her in her place. The world tilted. For a moment I could hear only the ringing in my ears. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I looked around the room searching for a face that would meet mine, for a hand that might reach across the table. Harold Green, my father's old partner, looked stricken, but stayed in his seat. A neighbor shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the door as if considering leaving. I pressed my palm against my burning cheek and forced myself to sit tall. I would not let them see me break. The humiliation pressed down on me heavier than the sting of the slap. In that instant, I understood that the invitation to this party had never been about reconciliation. It had been a stage, and I had been brought here to be humiliated. The chatter began to rise again, whispers and murmurs as people leaned toward each other, careful not to speak too loudly. My father returned to his chair as though nothing had happened. My mother touched his arm, her smile fixed for the room. Emily poured herself another glass of champagne, smirking in my direction. I sat frozen, staring at the lights of the Christmas tree, the ornaments reflecting the glow like tiny fragments of glass. My heart pounded, but beneath the shame, there was something else, something sharp and cold forming in my chest. I did not know it yet, but that was the moment everything began to change. When I was a little girl, I used to think the Carter family was the kind of family other people envied. My father was building his construction business from the ground up. My mother was beautiful and social, and I was their golden child, the one who won spelling bees and played the piano in every school recital. For the first 8 years of my life, I was their pride and joy. They bragged about me to neighbors, saved every ribbon I brought home, and filled photo albums with my smile. Everything shifted the year Emily was born. She was blonde, blue-eyed, and from the moment she arrived, it was as though the sun rose and set on her. I remember standing in the hospital room, clutching the new doll Grandma had bought for me, watching my parents coo over the crib. I was told to be a good big sister, to share, to help. Overnight, I was no longer the star of their world, but the responsible one who should know better. As children, the difference between us became impossible to ignore. When Emily broke my favorite toy, my parents said accidents happen. When she scribbled all over my science project the night before the fair, my mother said sisters share everything. I spent hours remaking it, bleary-eyed, and won second place. My father clapped politely but bragged later about Emily's drawing taped to the fridge. In high school, it grew worse. Emily sneaked into my closet and wore my prom dress without asking, returning it with a wine stain down the side. I cried and begged my parents for help, paying for cleaning, but they waved me off. Emily is young, they said. She just wanted to look pretty. The next week, my father slipped her money for a new outfit to make her feel better. When she crashed my car at 17, it was me who handled the insurance calls. They bought her jewelry to cheer her up while I rode the bus to work. I told myself that if I worked harder, if I achieved more, they would notice me again. So I studied late into the night, earned scholarships, and pushed myself until I graduated top of my class. I was the first in the family to attend MIT, living in Boston on nothing but part-time jobs and determination. Every success I earned was mine alone. In my second year at the firm where I now work, I met Michael. He was steady and kind, a young corporate attorney with a warm smile. He asked me questions no one else in my family had ever cared enough to ask. He wanted to know what books I read, what made me laugh, what I dreamed about. When we married 3 years later, it was a small ceremony in a church near Boston. I wore a simple lace gown, and Michael cried when I walked down the aisle. My parents criticized the whole thing as cheap, not grand enough for a Carter wedding. The greatest wound came when Michael and I discovered my struggle with endometriosis. We tried treatments, prayed through 2 miscarriages, and finally accepted that biological children might never be in our future. My mother called me a quitter. My father looked Michael in the eye and suggested he find a real woman who could give him sons. At holidays, Emily would lift her glass and joke about the barren branch of the family tree. The room always laughed, and I always excused myself to the bathroom to breathe through the sting of humiliation. We pulled back then slowly, at first fewer calls and shorter visits, then only Christmas cards. I thought distance might protect my heart, that maybe without the constant reminders of their disappointment, I could live freely. I built a life with Michael filled with friends who became family dinners in our brownstone apartment and vacations we paid for ourselves. We spoke of adoption someday, and for the first time I felt hope that family could be defined in a new way. Yet despite everything, when the invitation arrived for my father's Christmas party written in his handwriting, I let a flicker of hope in. Maybe turning 62 had softened him. Maybe he wanted to reconcile to finally acknowledge me as his daughter again. I ignored the knot of dread in my stomach and told myself people change. I wrapped a vintage pocket watch. I had searched weeks for one like my grandfather's, the kind my father had always admired. I drove to Concord believing this could be a new beginning. But the moment his hand met my face, all those years of being pushed aside came rushing back. The sound of guests gasping was the same as the laughter at Emily's cruel jokes, the same as the silence when my mother told me I had failed as a woman. In that single strike, my father confirmed what I had feared since I was a child, standing at Emily's crib. I was not his pride anymore. I was not even his equal. I was his shame to be put in place whenever I dared speak the truth. I sat there cheek-burning, replaying all of it in my head. The trophies that went unnoticed. The nights I stayed awake, memorizing formulas by candlelight when the power bill went unpaid. The quiet way Michael held me after every failed pregnancy, promising it did not change his love. All the sacrifices I made to prove I was enough. All the times I swallowed my hurt so my parents could keep their perfect picture intact. Emily's laughter rang in my ears long after the room quieted. She leaned into Jason, her manicured hand waving toward me like I was an unruly child who had embarrassed the family. I saw the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. She had always wanted me small, invisible, erased. Tonight, she finally had my parents' full performance to prove it. I forced my spine straight and looked across the room at faces I once thought of as family friends. Most turned away. Some whispered. Only Harold Green, my father's former partner, met my eyes. His face was pale, his jaw tight, and though he said nothing, something in his look told me he knew this had gone too far. I breathed deeply, willing myself not to cry. If I crumbled now, Emily would win, my mother would smirk, and my father would dismiss me once again. But as the tree lights flickered against the old windows, and the sting of my father's slap burned hotter than ever, I realized something I had never dared admit. This was not a family I could beg for love from any longer. This was a war I had to fight differently. I reached for my coat draped over the back of my chair, my fingers steady despite the shaking inside me. The guests watched as I stood. My mother's smile flickered, confused by my composure. My father gripped his glass tighter, eyes narrowed. Emily's smirk widened, assuming my silence meant defeat. I walked out into the December night, the cold air filling my lungs. Snow crunched under my boots as I made my way to my car. For the first time, I did not feel like the abandoned daughter begging for scraps of affection. I felt like a woman standing at the edge of something larger, something that could finally turn years of humiliation into something else entirely. What I did not know was that the whispers in that house would not stay within those walls. In the morning, the town would be buzzing with gossip, and my humiliation would spread further than I ever imagined. By the next morning, my phone buzzed non-stop with messages I had not asked for. A neighbor from my parents' street left me a voicemail, her tone hushed but brimming with curiosity. She said she had heard about a scene at the Carters' Christmas party and wanted to know if I was all right. I deleted it before she finished. Then came a text from an old classmate who still lived in Concord, asking if it was true that my father had struck me in front of everyone. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. Small towns have long memories, and news like this spreads faster than wildfire. I drove to the corner cafe near my apartment in Boston, hoping coffee might quiet my nerves. As I stood in line, I caught two women at a table whispering my name. They did not see me at first, but when one looked up and our eyes met, she flushed red and bent her head quickly. I felt the sting of shame rush through me again. Even here away from Concord, the whispers had followed me. By the time I returned home, my voicemail box was full. Some messages were kind, like from my coworker Melanie, who said she had heard gossip but did not believe it and was there if I needed someone. Others were cruel. One anonymous caller said, maybe my father had finally taught me a lesson. I gripped my phone so tight I thought it might crack. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen, staring at the snow falling outside, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Jason standing awkwardly in the hallway, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. His eyes darted down the hall as if making sure no one had followed him. "Rachel, can I come in for a minute?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. Jason had always been polite but distant, more like a shadow following my sister than a brother-in-law with his own convictions. Still, something in his expression looked genuine, even nervous. I stepped aside. He stood by the counter, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I am sorry about what happened last night. Sorry does not undo it," I said flatly. "I know." He rubbed his forehead. "But there are things you do not know. Emily and your parents have been saying things about you to everyone in town. They tell people you turned your back on the family, that you refuse to help when times are hard." My chest tightened. "They never asked me for help." Jason looked at me then, his eyes heavy. "They would never ask. They would rather paint you as selfish. It is easier that way." I leaned against the counter, my hands gripping the cool granite. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw your face last night. I saw the way he hit you. It was wrong. And the truth is, things are worse than you realize." He stopped chewing his lip. For a moment I thought he might tell me everything, but then he shook his head. "I cannot say more, not yet. Just be careful." "Be careful of what?" He shook his head again, his jaw tight. "I have said too much already." Before I could press him, he pulled on his gloves and slipped out the door, leaving me in silence. I sank into a chair, replaying his words. "There are things you do not know. Be careful." My heart pounded with both dread and curiosity. What could be so terrible that even Jason, who usually never went against Emily, would warn me? The next day at the grocery store near my apartment, I overheard two older women by the produce section. One said loudly enough for me to hear, "Poor Michael, imagine being married to someone who cannot even give him children and then humiliates her father at Christmas." I dropped the carton of strawberries in my hands, the red berries scattering across the floor. They stared at me, one with pity, the other with disdain. By the time I made it back to my car, I could hardly breathe. The humiliation had leapt from that dining room into every corner of my world. My private pain was now gossip for strangers. That night I sat in my living room with the lights dimmed, holding the old pocket watch I had wrapped so carefully for my father. He had not even opened it. My fingers traced the etched design on its cover. It felt like a relic from a dream I once had of being accepted again. Now it felt like evidence of my own foolish hope. My phone buzzed again, another message. This time it was from Jessica, my childhood friend who still lived in Concord. She wrote, "I heard about last night. I am so sorry. Can we talk?" I called her immediately. Her voice came through the line, warm and steady. "Rachel, you cannot let this break you. Everyone in town is talking, but you need to know it is not all true. Emily is stirring things up. She told people you refused to share your money, that you looked down on the family." I laughed bitterly. "Share my money? They have never asked. They only ridicule me." "I know," Jessica said softly. "But listen, I think it is more than just humiliation. I think they are trying to protect something." "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "I have heard whispers that your father's business is in trouble. Big trouble. And Emily has been telling people you want to cut ties so you do not get dragged into it." My grip tightened on the phone. I had not heard a word of this until now. My father had always boasted about Carter Construction, as if it were untouchable. "Rachel," Jessica continued, "just promise me you will be cautious. Emily and your parents are desperate. Desperate people do desperate things." When we hung up, I stared at the ceiling, the room spinning around me. The humiliation was only part of the story. Behind it was something darker, something that smelled of desperation and secrets. For the first time in years, I felt a surge of anger burn hotter than my shame. They had not only broken me in front of 20 guests, they were spreading lies through the town, painting me as selfish and bitter, all while hiding something from me. Jason's warning echoed in my mind, blending with Jessica's words. I knew then that I could not sit quietly anymore. Something was unraveling in my family, and if I did not uncover it, I would not just lose my dignity. I might lose everything tied to my name. The night after Jessica's call, I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone in my hand staring at Harold Green's number. I had not spoken to him in years. He had been my father's partner back when Carter Construction was expanding, a man who knew every detail of the business. I remembered him as kind, the one who used to sneak me cookies during long office visits. My father had cut ties with him, suddenly claiming Harold was slowing things down. I pressed call before I could overthink. The line rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. Harold Green. Mr. Green, it is Rachel Carter. There was silence, then a sigh. I was wondering when I might hear from you. After what happened at your parents' Christmas party, I figured it was only a matter of time. My heart skipped. You heard. Everyone heard, he said. Small towns do not keep secrets, Rachel. I am sorry for what they did to you. His voice was gentle, almost fatherly. The sound of it unlocked something inside me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Mr. Green, I think my father is hiding something. Something about the business. Can I see you? Come tomorrow morning. 7:30. My place out by Lake Walden. Bring nothing but yourself. The next morning was bitterly cold. Frost clung to the trees along the narrow road that led to his property. His house overlooked the frozen lake, a wide porch wrapped around the front, smoke curling from the chimney. He opened the door before I reached the steps, his frame still tall, though age had bent his shoulders. You look just like Eleanor, he said, softly, referring to my grandmother. Come in before we both freeze. The warmth of his home was immediate. The living room smelled of wood smoke and old books. He led me to his study, a room lined with shelves and heavy oak furniture. A pot of coffee steamed on the sideboard. I sat while he poured us each a cup. I will not waste time, he said. Your father has been drowning in debt for years. I tried to stop him when we were partners. He kept cutting corners, moving money, taking loans under names he should not have touched. That is why I left. I gripped the mug in both hands, trying to steady myself. Under names? What do you mean? Harold pulled open a drawer and set a worn file folder on the desk. Inside were documents, loan applications, signatures. My eyes widened. At the top of one page was my own name written in my father's bold hand, pretending to be mine. That cannot be, I whispered. I am afraid it is. Back in 2018, he used your name to co-sign for a $3.5 million loan. He told the bank you were a silent partner, that you had agreed to support Carter Construction's expansion. My stomach dropped. I never signed anything. I believe you, Rachel. I kept copies because I knew one day this might come back to haunt you. If those loans default, creditors could come after you personally. The words felt like ice water down my spine. I ran my finger over the forged signature, so close to my handwriting it made me sick. Years of discipline, of working late nights at my firm, could all be swept away because my father had stolen my name. Harold leaned back. He is desperate now. The company is bleeding money. Emily and Jason moved in with your parents because they could not make ends meet. Your father is clinging to the house as collateral. I thought of my grandmother's will, her insistence that the family home remain in trust for 3 generations. My father had always spoken of that house with pride. Now it was nothing more than a bargaining chip. What do I do? I asked quietly. Gather proof, Harold said firmly. Do not confront him yet. You need evidence, legal counsel, and someone you can trust. I nodded, my hands trembling. As I drove back toward Boston, the snow began to fall again, soft flakes covering the windshield. I pulled over at a rest stop, gripping the steering wheel. Anger surged through me, hot and steady. The humiliation of the slap had been cruel, but this was far more dangerous. He had stolen not only my dignity but my identity. When I reached home, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the pocket watch again. I thought about my grandmother, about the strength in her eyes when she told me once that family was not about pleasing everyone. It was about doing what was right. For the first time in years, I felt her presence like a hand on my shoulder. That evening, I called Jessica back. I need your help, I said. Do you still have family at the county office? Yes, she answered without hesitation. My cousin Diane works there. What do you need? I need to see Grandma Eleanor's will, the original one. And I need records of any recent changes to the house. Jessica paused, then said, I will call her. Whatever you need, Rachel, I am with you. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the city lights glowing outside the window. For years I had let their cruelty define me. For years I had taken the humiliation, convincing myself it was better to keep the peace. But now the truth was staring at me in black ink with a forged version of my own name. I poured myself a glass of water, steadying my breath. The next steps would not be easy. My father had built his life on control and intimidation. My mother had perfected the art of appearances. My sister had always been their darling. They would not hand me the truth willingly, but I was done waiting for scraps. The house was quiet except for the hum of the heater. I stood by the window watching the flakes of snow catch the streetlight, and knew this was only the beginning of uncovering just how deep my father's lies went. The next morning I woke with a heaviness in my chest that coffee could not shake. The folder Harold had shown me burned in my memory, those pages with my name scrawled across them in my father's bold hand. I needed to see it again, to hold the proof with my own fingers, not just rely on Harold's word. By mid-afternoon, I found myself back on the road toward Lake Walden, the winter sky pale, and flat bare trees lining the highway like silent witnesses. Harold opened the door before I knocked, as though he had been waiting. Come in, Rachel. I know why you are here. His study smelled of coffee and old wood. The folder lay on the desk as if it had not moved since yesterday. My hands trembled as I pulled out the documents one by one. Loan applications, incorporation papers, tax filings. Each bore a version of my signature that looked close enough to pass, but wrong enough to twist my stomach. This one, Harold said, tapping a page dated May 2018, was for the Riverfront project. Your father told the bank you were a partner. He's secured a $3.5 million loan with your name as guarantor. I felt my throat close. If that project failed, does that mean I could be liable? He nodded slowly. Yes, that is why I kept these. I knew someday it would come to light. I pressed my palms flat on the desk, grounding myself. For years I had worked hard to be independent, to keep my finances clean, to build something no one could take from me. And yet here it was my father's greed creeping into my life like a poison. Harold poured me coffee and waited until I had steadied myself. Rachel, your father is desperate. He is using every tool at his disposal, including you. You need to be smart about how you handle this. I studied the stack of papers, the black ink glaring against the white. He forged my name, I said quietly, more to myself than to Harold, my own father. Harold's eyes softened. I know it hurts, but you are not powerless. You have evidence and you have people who will help you. I took the folder and tucked it into my bag. I need to show this to Michael. He will know what to do. On the drive back to Boston, my phone buzzed with a text from Emily. It read, "You embarrass Dad enough. Stay out of family business." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. She was so sure of her position, so certain I would fold. For once, I almost felt sorry for her. She had no idea how much I had uncovered. When I reached my apartment, Michael was waiting, his suitcase still by the door from his trip. His eyes darkened as I laid the folder on the kitchen table and showed him the documents. He read each one carefully, his lips pressed tight. "This is fraud," he said finally. "Clear and simple. If he used your name without consent, that is a crime." I nodded, my chest heavy. "What happens if the bank comes after me?" Michael reached for my hand. "We will not let it get that far. But we need to move carefully. If we push too fast, he might destroy other evidence." I leaned against him, my cheek resting on his shoulder. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of safety. Later that evening, I called Jessica. She picked up on the first ring. "Did you find something?" "Yes," I said. "More than I wanted. My father forged my name on multi-million-dollar loans." There was a long pause. "Oh, Rachel." I told her I needed Diane's help with the county records. "I need to see Grandma's will, the original one. If Dad is trying to use the house as collateral, we have to know exactly what the trust says." Jessica promised to set up a meeting. "You are not alone in this," she said firmly. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the folder spread out before me. I ran my finger along the lines of ink, the dates, the lies. My father's voice echoed in my head from the Christmas party, his toast about legacy, his pride in family. It was all a mask to cover his desperation. I closed the folder and placed it carefully in the drawer by my bed. My heart ached, but underneath the pain was a spark of determination I had not felt in years. If he thought he could bury me under his lies, he had underestimated the daughter he had cast aside. The city outside my window was quiet snowflakes drifting under the streetlight. I poured a glass of water, steadying my breath. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more risks, but I had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. The following morning, Jessica met me at a diner just off Main Street in Concord, her scarf still wrapped around her neck and her cheeks flushed from the cold. She slid into the booth across from me with a quick hug and set down a steaming cup of coffee. "I spoke with Diane last night," she said in a low voice. "She is willing to help, but we have to be discreet." My stomach tightened. Thank you, truly. An hour later, Jessica drove us to the county building, a squat brick structure with salt stains on the steps and a constant flow of people filing in and out. Inside, Diane waited near the clerk's counter, her hair pulled back in a bun and a lanyard swinging from her neck. She looked like she carried the weight of too many secrets. She greeted me with a firm handshake. "I should not be doing this," she whispered, "but Jessica says you need answers. Come with me." We followed her down a narrow hallway, lined with file cabinets, until we reached a small records room. Diane closed the door behind us and pulled a thick binder from the shelf. "This is the original probate file for Eleanor Carter," she explained. "No one has looked at it in years." My fingers shook as I opened the binder. There it was, my grandmother's handwriting in the margins, her elegant script spelling out the wishes she had made crystal clear. The Carter home was to remain in trust for 3 generations. It could not be sold, mortgaged, or transferred without unanimous consent from both her grandchildren. It was like hearing her voice again, steady and strong, guiding me even after death. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. She had protected us, protected me, even though my parents had spent years pretending I did not exist. Diane tapped the page. "If your father has tried to use the property for collateral, he is in violation of this trust. That is not a minor issue." I swallowed hard. "So legally he cannot touch it. Not without your consent," she confirmed. "And if he has misrepresented the ownership to lenders, that is serious fraud." Jessica squeezed my arm. "You see, Rachel, you are not crazy. They are the ones breaking the law." I closed the binder carefully, my pulse racing. All these years my father acted like the house was his kingdom, but it had never been his to give away. Before we left, Diane pressed a folded slip of paper into my hand. "This is a list of recent filings on the property. You might want to look closely at the dates." In the car, I unfolded the paper. My eyes locked on the entry from October, just 2 months before Christmas. It showed an attempted modification, a filing my father had tried to push through listing Emily as successor trustee. My blood ran cold. "He is trying to cut me out," I whispered. Jessica gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Then we have to move faster." That night I sat in my apartment with the documents spread out on the table, Michael beside me flipping through each page. His jaw tightened with every line. "Rachel, this is enough to get an injunction. He cannot legally maneuver around you. But if he has already lied to lenders," I said, "what happens then?" He looked at me steadily. "Then we have leverage." I leaned back, exhausted but sharper than ever. For years I had felt like the powerless daughter erased from family photos, diminished by cruel words. Now the truth lay in black and white. My grandmother's wishes were ironclad, and my father's manipulations were nothing but smoke and mirrors. Jessica called later that evening. "Are you all right?" "I am more than all right," I told her. For the first time in years, I feel like Grandma is standing right beside me. After we hung up, I carried the binder and papers into my bedroom, placing them in a locked chest at the foot of my bed. I touched the cool metal surface and whispered a promise to myself. I would not be silenced again. The city outside was hushed under new snow, but inside my chest the storm was only beginning. Michael sat across from me at the kitchen table, the trust papers and forged loan documents spread between us. He rubbed his temples, his lawyer mind already calculating next steps. "Rachel, we cannot handle this alone anymore. It is bigger than family arguments. This is criminal." I felt my stomach tighten. I knew he was right, but saying it out loud made it real. "What do we do?" He pulled out his phone. "I know someone, a colleague from law school. His name is Brian Hoffman. He specializes in estate fraud and identity theft. If anyone can protect you, it is him." The following day, I walked into a sleek office building downtown Boston, my heart pounding as the elevator climbed to the 15th floor. Brian greeted us in the lobby, a tall man in his 40s, with steady eyes and the kind of calm that made you feel both safe and unnerved. He motioned us into his office and gestured for me to begin. I laid out the documents Harold had given me then, the slip of paper from Diane, with the property filings. As Brian flipped through each page, his brows furrowed deeper. "This is not small," he said finally. "Your father has committed forgery. He has used your identity without authorization, likely multiple times. If these loans have defaulted, you could face creditors coming after you personally." The words made me grip the armrest of the chair. Could I really be sued for debts I never agreed to? Brian's voice softened. "That is why we move now. With the evidence you have and the original trust documents, we can petition the court to freeze any transfer of the Carter house. We can also begin preparing a case for fraud if necessary." Michael squeezed my hand. "She is not trying to destroy her family, Brian. She just wants the truth protected." Brian nodded. "Then we will take the most strategic path. We will secure the house first. Then if your father pushes back, we show the courts what he has done." For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight shift. I was not powerless anymore. Later that night, back in our apartment, I sat by the window with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Boston's skyline glowed in the distance, but all I could see in my mind was my father's face when the truth finally confronted him. I wondered if he would rage or crumble or both. Michael joined me, handing me a mug of tea. "You are strong, Rachel. Do not forget that." I looked at him grateful. I spent so many years trying to earn their approval. Now I see it was never about me not being enough. It was about them needing control. The next week, Brian filed the paperwork for the injunction, citing the trust language Diane had uncovered. He explained each step carefully, making sure I understood. It was clinical legal, but beneath it all, I felt something personal. My grandmother's voice, her promise that the house would stay in the family, was finally being honored through me. At night, I dreamed of the Carter home, its wide porch, and the pine tree that had stood for generations in the yard. For years, I had avoided it, associating it with pain. Now I thought of it as a fortress of truth I had to protect. Still, fear lingered. I knew my father would not sit quietly. He would lash out, manipulate, twist the story. My mother would stand by him, Emily would clap and cheer, as she always had. But Jason's warning echoed in my ears, and Harold's steady gaze reminded me I had allies. One evening, as snow tapped against the windows, Michael read over Brian's draft motion again. "He is airtight," he said. "They cannot ignore this." I exhaled slowly. Good. But deep inside, I knew the hardest part was still to come. Legal documents could protect the house, but they could not mend the betrayal or silence the lies spreading through Concord. That part would require me to face my family head-on. I closed my eyes, hearing again the echo of my father's hand across my cheek, Emily's laughter, my mother's smirk. Those memories no longer made me shrink. They fueled me. The storm inside me was no longer chaos. It was focus. The next move would be mine. The following morning, I woke before dawn, my chest tight with the weight of everything I carried. The city outside was still quiet, but my mind spun, as though it had been running all night. I knew I could not stay in the safety of my apartment forever. If my father was bold enough to forge my name on multi-million-dollar loans, then the lies could be deeper than I imagined. I needed to see the evidence with my own eyes, not just trust what Harold had shown me. Michael poured coffee into 2 mugs as I pulled on my coat. "Where are you going this early?" he asked, his brow furrowed. I told him about Mark, the loan officer at the Bank of America branch in downtown Boston. A friend of Michael's colleague had put us in touch, and he had agreed to discreetly check whether my name was tied to accounts or loans. Michael insisted on coming with me. The city was just waking as we drove through streets lined with slush and parked cars dusted with snow. We walked into the tall glass building, the warm air smelling of carpet cleaner and printer ink. People shuffled past us in long coats, some clutching portfolios or envelopes. Mark met us in the lobby, a man in his 50s with thinning hair and eyes that looked tired but kind. He shook Michael's hand, then mine, and led us into a small office with frosted glass walls. "Please sit," he said, his tone low. "I did some digging after we spoke on the phone. What I found is troubling." My heart thudded as he turned the monitor so I could see. On the screen were loan files, scanned signatures, financial statements. My name appeared again and again. Rachel Carter, guarantor, partner. "That cannot be right," I whispered, leaning closer. Mark clicked to enlarge one signature. I stared at the loops of the R, the careful slant of the C. It was close, frighteningly close, but it was not mine. My father had always had a knack for imitating handwriting when he wanted to. "I never signed that." Mark gave a slow nod. "Then someone forged it. This particular document is tied to a refinancing from 2021, $2 million in debt. If it defaults, the bank could come after you." The room tilted for a moment. I gripped the armrest of the chair. Michael's hand steadied mine. "She never authorized any of this," he said firmly. Mark's face was grave. "Then you need to protect yourself. Take copies of these. You will need them." He printed a stack and slid them into a folder. I tucked it into my bag with trembling hands. As we left the bank, the cold air slapped my face. I breathed hard, trying to calm the storm in my chest. Michael's arm wrapped around my shoulders. "This only proves what Harold warned us about. We are going to stop him, Rachel." Back in the car, I pulled out the documents and flipped through them, page after page of my name. Used like a tool, my life turned into collateral. Rage pulsed through me, but beneath it was something colder. If my father could do this to me, his own daughter, what else was he capable of? That afternoon, Jessica came by with bagels, her hair tucked under a knit cap, her eyes wide with concern. "You look pale. What happened?" I spread the papers across the table. Another loan. $2 million. My name forged again. Jessica's mouth fell open. "Rachel, this is criminal," Michael nodded grimly. "And we will treat it that way." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I cannot believe your parents would let it go this far." "They would," I said quietly. "And worse. They already humiliated me in front of the town. Why stop at my dignity when they could also take my future?" We sat in silence for a long time, the hum of the heater the only sound. Finally, Jessica said, "I am with you whatever comes next." Later that evening, when Jessica had left, I carried the new folder into my bedroom and placed it beside the trust documents. The metal chest felt heavier now, as though it carried not only paper but the truth of decades of betrayal. I knelt by it for a moment, my hand resting on the lid. I thought of my grandmother, her firm voice when she told me once that integrity was worth more than money. She had built that house as a home, not as a bargaining chip. She would never have imagined her son twisting her legacy into debt and deception. Michael leaned against the doorway, watching me. He said softly, "Every piece of evidence we find is one step closer to freedom." I looked up at him, and one step further from them ever forgiving me. He crossed the room and pulled me into his arms. "They made their choice, Rachel. Now you make yours." That night I could not sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the city lights seeping through the blinds. I remembered my father's toast at the Christmas party, his voice booming about legacy and loyalty. Now those words felt like ash. He had used loyalty as a leash, legacy as a weapon. At 3 a.m, I rose and stood by the window watching the snow fall under the glow of the streetlight. The quiet of the night wrapped around me, but inside I felt sharper than ever. They thought humiliation would silence me. They thought forged signatures would trap me. They thought gossip would bury me. I pressed my hand to the cold glass and whispered to myself, they were wrong. The storm inside me was no longer fear. It was resolve steady and unshakable. By the time the first light of dawn touched the rooftops, I knew exactly what needed to be done. Tomorrow I would meet Brian again. This time I would not come only as a daughter seeking help. I would come armed with proof that could change everything. Brian's office felt colder that morning, though the heat hummed steadily through the vents. I slid the new folder across his desk, the papers I had gathered from the bank, still crisp from the printer. He skimmed them quickly, his jaw tightening as his eyes flicked from one page to the next. This is exactly what we needed, he said. With this and the trust documents, we can stop any attempt to transfer the house. More than that, Rachel, this is enough to open a fraud investigation. The word fraud rang in my ears. I folded my hands in my lap, my pulse hammering. He is my father, I whispered. Brian leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. He is also a man who has used your identity to secure millions in loans. The law will not see him as your father. It will see him as a fraudster. Michael rested his hand over mine, grounding me. We are not here to destroy them, Rachel. We are here to protect you and your grandmother's legacy. I nodded, swallowing hard. Then what comes next? Brian outlined the steps. First, we would file an emergency motion in probate court to freeze any transfer of the Carter home. Then we would prepare a separate claim detailing the forged signatures and unauthorized loans. He warned that once the papers were served, there would be no way to contain the fallout. As we left the office, the cold Boston wind whipped around us. Michael wrapped his scarf tighter and said, "They will fight this. You need to be ready." I already was. That evening, Jessica came over, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her arms full of groceries. She cooked pasta while I told her everything Brian had said. When I finished, she set down the spoon and looked me squarely in the eyes. "Rachel, you have to be prepared for the town to turn against you. Your parents have painted themselves as victims for years. Once this comes out, they will double down." I sighed. "I know. They already have Concord whispering that I am selfish." "Then you show them the truth," Jessica said fiercely. "People respect facts more than gossip, especially when the law gets involved." Her words gave me strength, though fear still lingered. The next morning, while snow fell thick across the city, Michael suggested we reach out to Harold again. He might still have documents from his partnership with my father that could add weight to our case. We drove out to Lake Walden, the roads slick with ice. Harold greeted us at the door, his breath visible in the frigid air. "I figured I would see you again soon," he said, ushering us into his study. I laid the new bank papers on his desk. His brows rose as he read them. "He is still at it," Harold muttered. "I suspected as much. Wait here." He went to a filing cabinet and pulled out another thick folder. Inside were letters from banks, contracts, even emails printed and saved. Many bore my name in bold print where it should never have appeared. I flipped through the stack, bile rising in my throat. He has been doing this for years. Harold's eyes softened. He thinks the rules do not apply to him, but the walls are closing in, Rachel. Back in the car, I sat in silence, the folder heavy in my lap. Michael reached over and squeezed my knee. "Every piece of this makes you stronger." That night, as I placed Harold's folder with the others in my chest, I felt something shift inside me. This was no longer just about humiliation or betrayal. It was about survival, about standing for the truth, even when it meant standing alone. The next day, Brian filed the emergency motion. The court date was set for the following week. My hands trembled when I read the stamped notice. Jessica stopped by that evening and found me staring at the document. She took it gently from my hands. "This is good news, Rachel. It means they cannot sell or transfer the house before the hearing." I nodded, but my chest still felt tight. "Once they get this notice, everything will explode." Jessica sat beside me, her voice steady. "Then let it. You are ready for it." I looked at her, my eyes burning. "Am I?" "Yes," she said, "because you finally have the truth on your side." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. She was right. For the first time in years, I was no longer the invisible daughter hiding in the corner. I was the woman bringing light into the shadows my family had tried to bury me under. The snow outside glowed under the streetlights, soft and white, but inside me the storm built stronger, waiting for the moment it would break. The morning the notice was served to my parents, I woke with a knot in my stomach that no amount of coffee could loosen. Brian had warned me the sheriff's office would deliver the papers, and once that envelope landed in their hands, silence would no longer be an option. By early afternoon, Jessica called, her voice tight. "It is done. They got the notice. Half the town already knows." I pressed my hand against the counter to steady myself. "How did they take it?" She hesitated. "Your father shouted so loud the neighbors heard. Your mother told people you are trying to destroy them. And Emily—" I braced myself. "What did she say?" Jessica exhaled. "She told anyone who would listen that you are bitter because you cannot have children, and this is your way of punishing the family." Her words landed like stones in my chest, familiar and cruel. I closed my eyes, forcing myself not to cry. Of course she would use that. It was always her favorite weapon. That evening, Michael found me sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. He sat beside me and took my hand. "They are going to lash out, Rachel. But the court will see the truth." The following days were a blur of whispers and phone calls. Coworkers avoided my eyes at the office. Neighbors in my building looked twice when I walked by. The Carters were a respected name in Concord, and now their daughter was dragging them into court. One evening as I left work, Jason was waiting near the entrance, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. His face was pale, his eyes restless. "Rachel, can we talk?" I stiffened. "Why now?" "Please, just 5 minutes." We walked to a quiet bench near the frozen river. He sat heavily, his shoulders slumped. "I never wanted this," he said. "I told Emily your father was going too far, but she wouldn't listen." I stared at him, my voice sharper than I intended. "You knew he was using my name." Jason flinched. "I found some documents when I was helping him with refinancing last year. I told him it was dangerous. I told Emily too. She said it was none of my business." My stomach churned with disgust. "You stood by while they tried to ruin me." His eyes filled with shame. "I did not know how to fight them, but I am telling you now, Rachel, he has other accounts. Offshore ones. If you dig, you will find them." I stood quickly, my breath clouding in the cold air. "If you really cared, you would have spoken sooner." Jason's voice cracked. "I am sorry." I walked away, my boots crunching on the ice, anger carrying me forward. Back in Boston, Michael listened quietly as I relayed the conversation. He set down his glass of water and said, "If Jason is right, this could go deeper than we thought. Offshore accounts mean tax fraud, not just forgery." The thought chilled me. Every new layer of deceit made the ground beneath me feel thinner, but it also gave me strength. The truth was bigger than humiliation now. It was about justice. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived with icy winds whipping across the courthouse steps. I wore a dark coat and clutched the folder of documents so tightly, my knuckles turned white. Michael walked beside me, steady and calm. Inside, the probate courtroom was small but full, whispers echoing as familiar faces from Concord filled the benches. My parents sat at the front, my mother's chin lifted in defiance, my father's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Emily sat between them, her arms folded, her glare fixed on me like a dagger. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Brian rose and presented the emergency motion, laying out the trust documents with calm precision. He explained how the Carter home had been placed in trust by my grandmother, and how any attempt to transfer or mortgage it without my consent violated the terms. My father shifted in his seat, his face growing redder by the second. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he shot to his feet. "This is my house. I built this family. She abandoned us years ago, and now she wants to take everything." The judge raised a hand for silence. "Mr. Carter, the document speaks for itself. Unless you can produce evidence that supersedes this trust, your daughter's consent is required." Gasps rippled through the room. My mother's face tightened, her hands gripping her purse. Emily leaned toward her, whispering furiously. The judge set the next hearing date for 3 weeks later and granted the injunction to freeze any transfer of the house. The gavel struck, and just like that, the tide had shifted. As people filed out, I felt dozens of eyes on me. Some looked curious, others judgmental, but a few held sympathy. Emily brushed past me, her perfume sharp, her voice low and venomous. "You think you have won. This is not over." I met her glare with steady eyes. "No, Emily. It is only beginning." Outside, the cold air bit at my cheeks, but I inhaled deeply, letting it fill my lungs. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Michael took my hand as we descended the steps. "Whatever storm is coming, we are ready." I looked at him, then back at the courthouse doors where my parents and sister lingered in angry clusters. They had underestimated me for too long. This time I would not back down. The week after the hearing was a blur of long days and restless nights. Every time my phone rang, I half expected it to be my parents, but they stayed silent. Instead, whispers spread through Concord like wildfire. Old friends from high school texted to ask if it was true. Neighbors who once nodded politely now avoided eye contact, and colleagues in Boston seemed to measure me differently when I walked into the office. Michael tried to shield me from it, but the gossip was impossible to escape. Jessica called one evening, her voice tight. "Rachel, they are telling people you are suing your own family out of greed, that you want to take the house and sell it for cash." I closed my eyes, pressing the phone harder to my ear. "That house is not just property, Jess. It is Grandma's legacy." "I know," she said quickly, "but they are twisting everything." I hung up, feeling both furious and hollow. My parents had spent years shaping the town's view of me, and now they were doubling down. A few days later, I received a message from Jason asking to meet again. Against my better judgment, I agreed, if only to see what else he might reveal. We sat in a quiet booth at a small diner off Route 2, the smell of fried food thick in the air. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed. "Rachel, I need to tell you something. Your father has been moving money offshore. He used shell companies, some with your name tied to them." Ice slid down my spine. "You are telling me he laundered money under my name?" Jason nodded miserably. "I should have said something sooner, but Emily threatened to leave me if I crossed your father." I leaned back, my appetite gone. "And now I cannot keep quiet. You deserve to know." I stared at him, my hands clenched. "If you have proof, Jason, bring it forward. Otherwise, you are just another voice in a storm of lies." He slid an envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of wire transfers, signatures, and routing numbers. My name appeared again where it should not. My stomach turned. If this was true, the fraud was deeper than I ever imagined. Back home, I laid the documents out on the table while Michael read over them. His jaw tightened with every page. "This is not just probate court anymore, Rachel. If this gets to federal investigators, it is wire fraud and identity theft on a massive scale." I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. How could he risk everything, even prison, just to keep control? "Because control is all he knows," Michael said softly. The next day we met with Brian, handing him the envelope. He scanned the pages with a practiced eye, then looked up sharply. "These are serious. If we introduce them in court, it will not just be about the house. It will be about criminal charges." I felt the ground shift beneath me. Part of me wanted to protect what little was left of family ties, but another part, the stronger part, knew I could not bury this truth. That evening, Jessica stopped by with wine. We sat at my kitchen table, the city lights flickering through the window. She raised her glass. To Rachel, finally standing up to them. I managed a small smile. But at what cost? Her eyes softened. Sometimes the cost of silence is worse. I thought of the Christmas party, of my father's hand striking my face, my mother's laughter, Emily's applause. The humiliation had been public, but this fraud, this theft of my name, was the real wound. The days blurred as we prepared for the next hearing. Brian worked late drafting motions, Michael reviewed every line, and I gathered courage from every piece of paper we uncovered. On the morning of the court date, I stood outside the courthouse, the winter air biting at my cheeks. Jessica hugged me tight before we went in. "You are not alone," she whispered. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with tension. My parents sat stiffly, my father's glare fixed on the judge's bench, my mother's pearls glinting under the lights. Emily leaned back in her chair, smug as ever. When Brian presented the new evidence, the room seemed to shift. Murmurs rippled through the benches as he laid out the wire transfers, the forged signatures, the offshore accounts. My father's face drained of color, then flushed red with fury. He leapt to his feet, his voice booming. Lies. All of it. My daughter is conspiring with outsiders to destroy me. The judge banged the gavel sharply. Sit down, Mr. Carter. Silence fell, but the damage was done. Everyone in that room had seen his mask crack. I sat tall, my hands folded neatly, my eyes fixed on the judge. For the first time, I did not feel like the abandoned daughter begging for scraps of love. I felt like the woman my grandmother had raised me to be, standing firm in truth. The hearing adjourned with the judge ordering a full review of the financial records. As we filed out, I caught Emily's eyes. Her confidence faltered for a moment, a flicker of fear crossing her face. Outside, the cold air hit me, but I breathed deeply. The storm was no longer just inside me. It was spilling into the open, and nothing would stop it now. The morning of the final hearing dawned gray and bitterly cold, the kind of day when the air stings your cheeks and the sky feels heavy enough to press down on your shoulders. I stood outside the courthouse with Michael beside me, clutching my gloves in one hand and the folder of documents in the other. For weeks, the town had been buzzing with rumors, and now everything would come to light. Inside the courtroom, the benches were full again. Old neighbors, business associates of my father, even a few distant relatives had come to witness the spectacle. My parents sat at the front, my mother's pearl earrings catching the light, her chin raised high, as though daring anyone to pity her. My father's hands clenched the edge of the table, his face pale but his jaw set in defiance. Emily sat next to them, her expression shifting between smugness and unease. The judge entered and Brian began. He spoke with calm authority, laying out the evidence piece by piece. He presented the trust documents, first reminding the court that my grandmother's will had been clear. Then came the bank loans, the forged signatures, the wire transfers with my name tied to accounts I had never seen. With each page entered into record, the weight of my father's deceit grew heavier in the room. When Brian finished, the judge turned to my father. Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say in your defense? My father rose slowly, his voice loud but unsteady. This is my family's business. My daughter abandoned us years ago. She has no right to interfere. The judge's eyes narrowed. That may be your belief, but the law does not support it. The trust is binding, and these documents clearly show a pattern of fraud. Gasps spread across the courtroom. My mother pressed her lips together, her knuckles white around her purse. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her confidence cracking. The judge's ruling was swift. The Carter home would remain in trust, untouchable without my consent. An independent review of the company's finances would begin immediately, and federal investigators would be notified of the forged documents. My father's face went slack, his mouth opening as if to protest, but no words came out. My mother looked straight ahead, as if refusing to see the wreckage around her. Emily buried her face in her hands for a moment, then glanced at me with a look that was part fury, part fear. When the gavel struck, it felt like the air shifted. Years of silence, humiliation, and betrayal seemed to lift, replaced by something solid and final. I walked out of that courtroom into the cold January air, and for the first time in decades, I felt free. In the weeks that followed, the truth rippled through Concord. Neighbors who once whispered now looked at me differently. Some apologized for believing the stories my parents had spun. Others stayed quiet, embarrassed they had ever taken sides. My parents retreated into themselves. My father resigned from his company, the once proud builder, now a man diminished by his own choices. My mother kept to her circle of social friends, but her laughter no longer rang as it once had. Emily and Jason left town quietly, their debts mounting, and their reputations in ruins. I did not rejoice in their downfall, but I could not deny the sense of justice. It was not revenge in the fiery sense, but a quiet restoration of balance. The house, my grandmother's legacy, was safe. My name was no longer a tool for their greed. One Saturday, I drove out to the old Carter home. The porch sagged slightly, the paint peeling in places, but the tall pine tree in the yard stood as strong as ever. I stood on the steps, my gloved hand resting on the railing, and whispered a thank you to my grandmother. Her wisdom had carried me through when nothing else had. Jessica met me there, handing me a thermos of hot coffee. "You did it," she said simply. I smiled, a real smile that felt strange on my face after so many months of strain. "No, we did it." Michael joined us later, his arms slipping around my shoulders as we looked out at the snowy yard. The storm had passed. I had thought justice would feel like triumph, but instead it felt like peace. A deep exhale after years of holding my breath. To those listening, I want to say this. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are not in boardrooms or offices, but within our own families. The wounds cut deeper, the betrayals sting longer, but standing up for yourself does not mean you are cruel. It means you are brave enough to honor the truth. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between silence and speaking out, even against those closest to you? I would love to hear your stories in the comments. If this journey spoke to you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that even in the darkest storms, truth and courage can light the way.